The chandelier lights blinded me as I stood frozen in the corner of the ballroom, my sister Madison's words still ringing in my ears like shattered glass. And before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The family shame finally showed up. She'd said it with a smile, champagne flute in hand, loud enough for the entire bridal party to hear, loud enough to make heads turn, loud enough to make me question why I'd even come. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened next. When her new husband James turned around, his face went from celebration to shock in an instant, because the family shame he was now staring at. I wasn't just Madison's sister. I was his boss, his direct supervisor, the woman who had just approved his promotion last week. My name is Erika Daniels, and wherever you're watching this from, stay with me. Because sometimes the most powerful moment in your life isn't when you defend yourself. It's when reality does it for you. I never wanted to be successful just to prove something. That wasn't my intention when I worked triple shifts at the local diner while putting myself through night classes. That wasn't on my mind when I slept 4 hours a night finishing my computer science degree while my peers were out living their college experience. Success, for me, was about survival first, then stability, then finally, freedom. Growing up, in Denver, I was always the odd one out in my family. My parents were traditional. Dad worked in insurance, Mom taught elementary school, and my sister Madison was the golden child who followed all the rules. She got good grades, dated the right boys, joined the right clubs, and smiled in all the family photos. I was different, curious, questioning, ambitious in ways that made my family uncomfortable. "Girls like us don't run companies," my mother would say whenever I talked about my dreams. "We support the men who do." Madison would nod along, content, with the path laid out before her. By the time I was 17, I had learned to keep my aspirations quiet. I applied to tech programs in secret, saved every dollar from my after-school jobs, and when acceptance letters came, I chose the one offering the most financial aid. The night I told my family I was leaving, my father didn't speak to me. "My mother cried." Madison rolled her eyes and said, "Always have to be different, don't you?" 10 years passed like a blur. Graduation, entry-level coding job, promotions, startup experience. Eventually landing at Horizon Tech Solutions, where I worked my way from developer to team lead to director of software development. I built a life that fit me, a comfortable condo with a view of the mountains, a small circle of loyal friends, and the respect of my colleagues. But family gatherings remained cold, strained exercises intolerance. My sister continued to be the benchmark for what my parents considered success. She married her college boyfriend, moved to the suburbs, and embraced the life they had always envisioned. When I received invitations to family events, they felt like obligations rather than celebrations. I showed up because not showing up would have given them more reason to paint me as the villain in their story. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Thick cream paper with gold foil lettering. "Madison Reynolds and James Parker request the honor of your presence." I almost tossed it aside, planning to send a gift instead of attending. But something stopped me. Maybe it was hope, that persistent, foolish hope that this time would be different. Maybe it was the thought that I was done hiding, done playing small to make others comfortable with my choices. 2 weeks before the wedding, my company announced a round of promotions. As director, I reviewed the final candidates. One name stood out: James Parker. Talented, hardworking, with excellent performance reviews. I didn't make the connection. Parker is a common enough name, and I'd never met Madison's fiancé. I approved his promotion without a second thought. That single signature would change everything. The Mountain View Lodge was spectacular, all glass and timber perched on the edge of the Rockies. I arrived alone, dressed in a simple navy blue dress that had cost more than my first month's rent years ago. Success had its perks, even if my family refused to acknowledge them. I kept to myself during the ceremony, sitting in the back, trying to blend into the scenery. Madison was radiant, of course. Her dress probably cost more than my car. Our parents beamed with pride from the front row. I smiled politely, clapped at the right moments, and wondered if anyone would notice if I slipped out before the reception. But I stayed. Something inside me refused to run this time. The reception was elegant but oppressive. Crystal glasses, white roses, string quartet. I recognized a few distant relatives who gave me tight smiles before turning away. I was just finishing my first glass of champagne, contemplating an early exit when Madison spotted me from across the room. She floated over, pulling her new husband behind her like a trophy. "Erika, you actually came." Her voice carried that familiar edge, sweet on the surface but sharp underneath. "James, this is my sister, the one I told you about." I extended, my hand, professional as always. "Congratulations to you both." James began to reach for my hand, still smiling. That's when Madison leaned in, champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass, and said it loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. The family shame finally showed up. The room seemed to still. There was a moment of awful silence before nervous laughter bubbled up around us. My cheeks burned, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of boardroom negotiations coming to my rescue. Then James fully turned to face me, and his smile froze. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by unmistakable panic. "Ms. Daniels?" he managed, his voice suddenly formal. Madison's perfect smile faltered. "Wait, you know each other?" I took a slow sip of champagne before answering. James was just promoted to senior project manager at Horizon. I signed off on it last week. I turned to him with professional courtesy. "Congratulations again, James. On everything." His face went pale. Madison's went red. And in that moment, something shifted in the power dynamic that had defined my family relationships for decades. Not because I had orchestrated it. I hadn't even known James worked for my company until that moment. But because reality had finally caught up with the narrative. Madison recovered quickly, pulling James away with some excuse about greeting other guests. But the damage was done. Throughout the evening, I caught snippets of urgent whispers. "Her boss? Why didn't you tell me?" I had no idea they worked together. And most telling, how was I supposed to know she was important? I didn't stay long after that. There was no scene, no confrontation, no dramatic speech about years of being diminished and dismissed. I simply finished my champagne, left an envelope with a generous check on the gift table, and walked out with my head high. As I drove back to my condo that night, the full weight of what had happened settled over me. For years, I had tried to prove my worth to my family, bringing achievements to their table only to have them pushed aside. All that time, I thought if I just succeeded enough, they would finally see me. But that night I realized, some people will never acknowledge your light because it forces them to question the shadows they've chosen to live in. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. Tired of seeking validation from people determined not to give it. Tired of measuring my success against their limited metrics. Tired of showing up for people who had never really shown up for me. The Monday after the wedding was surreal. I arrived at the office as usual, coffee in hand, mind focused on the week's priorities. James was waiting outside my office, looking like he hadn't slept. I invited him in, closed the door, and sat behind my desk. "Ms. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniels, about Saturday," he began, his voice tight. I held up a hand. James, what happens in my family is separate from what happens here. Your promotion was based on your performance, nothing else. I kept my voice even, professional. I don't discuss my personal life at work, and I don't expect you to either. Relief washed over his face, followed quickly by something that looked like shame. I had no idea, he said finally. Madison never mentioned what you do, only that you were. He trailed off, unwilling to repeat my sister's characterizations. The family shame? I supplied, raising an eyebrow. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. If I had known, would it have changed things? I asked, genuinely curious. Would you have defended me to her? To them? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. I gestured toward the door. We have a company meeting at 11. I'll see you there. He left, and I allowed myself one moment of weakness, one moment to close my eyes and feel the weight of it all. Then I straightened my spine, opened my laptop, and got back to work. Because that's what I'd always done. That's what had carried me this far. What I didn't know then was that the wedding incident was about to crack open something I'd kept buried for years. Not just with my family, but within myself. The thing about shame is that it thrives in silence. And I had been silent for far too long. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my condo, replaying not just the wedding, but years of interactions with my family. The graduations where my achievements were downplayed. The holidays where my career was dismissed as a phase before I settled down properly. The constant comparisons to Madison, always to my detriment. Around 2 a.m, I opened my laptop and began typing. Not a confrontational email or a scathing social media post, but something more personal. A journal entry titled simply, "The Day I Stopped Being Ashamed." I wrote until dawn, pouring out decades of hurt and hope and determination. When I finished, I felt lighter somehow, as if naming the pain had diminished its power. I saved the document, closed my laptop, and finally slept. The next few weeks were a strange limbo. At work, James was professional but distant, clearly uncomfortable with our connection. I maintained our working relationship with the same efficiency I applied to everything else. At home, my phone remained silent. No calls from my parents asking how I was. No texts from Madison attempting to smooth things over. Just silence, the kind that speaks volumes. My friend Nathan, one of the few people who knew the full history with my family, urged me to reach out. Maybe this is an opportunity, he suggested over coffee one weekend. Maybe now they'll see you differently. I stirred my latte, considering his words. The thing is, Nathan, I'm not sure I want them to anymore. It was the first time I'd said it aloud, this quiet revelation that had been forming since the wedding. I don't think I need their validation to feel whole. He smiled then, a proud smile that made me realize how far I'd come from the uncertain girl who'd first arrived in the city, desperate to prove herself. Then what do you need? He asked. It was a good question. What did I need? Not success for its own sake. I already had that. Not revenge or vindication. Those were empty calories for the soul. What I needed, I realized, was to find peace with my own story, and maybe, just maybe, to help others write better endings to theirs. 3 days later, my sister texted me. No apology, just a request. We need to talk about James. Not, I'm sorry for humiliating you at my wedding. Not, I've been unfair to you for years. Just concern about her husband's job, about how my position might affect his career. Always, always self-interest dressed up as family concern. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took the journal entry I'd written and expanded it, refined it. I added context, removed anything that felt like retribution rather than truth. What emerged was less a personal rant and more a meditation on family dynamics, on the courage it takes to forge your own path, on the freedom that comes from releasing the need for approval from those who aren't equipped to give it. When I finally replied to Madison, it was with a simple, "My office, Thursday at 5 p.m. She arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably as always, discomfort evident in the tight set of her shoulders. James wasn't with her. She looked around my office with poorly disguised surprise. The awards on the wall, the view of downtown, Denver, the clear evidence of a success she'd been taught to dismiss. "Erika," she began, perching on the edge of the visitor's chair as if afraid to fully commit to being in my space. "About the wedding." "I'm not interested in discussing the wedding," I interrupted, keeping my voice measured. "What's done is done." Her perfect brows furrowed. "Then why am I here?" I slid a folder across my desk. Inside was a printed copy of what I'd written, now titled, "The Cost of Conditional Love, Breaking Free from Family Expectations." "I want you to read this," I said simply. "Not here, not now. Take it home. Read it when you're ready. It's not an attack. It's just my truth." She stared at the folder as if it might bite her. "And James? His position here?" "James's career will be determined by his performance and his performance alone," I assured her. "I've never mixed personal and professional matters, and I don't intend to start now." Relief flickered across her face, followed immediately by something else. A flicker of shame, perhaps, at the realization that her first concern had been for her husband's job security, not for the sister she'd publicly humiliated. "Madison?" I added as she stood to leave. "I don't need you to be proud of me. I don't need you to understand my choices, but I do need you to respect them and to respect me. Can you do that?" She didn't answer immediately, clutching the folder to her chest like a shield. "I'll read it," she finally said, and left without another word. I watched her go, feeling neither victory nor defeat, just a quiet certainty that whatever happened next, I had spoken my truth. The rest was up to her. The following Sunday, I received a rare call from my mother. Her voice was strained, careful. "Madison showed us what you wrote," she said. "No greeting, no small talk. Your father is upset." "I'm sure he is," I replied, evenly. Truth often upsets people who've built their lives on avoiding it. "Erika," she sighed, her voice carrying decades of disappointment. "Why must you always make things so difficult? Why can't you just be like Madison?" I finished for her. "Accept the limitations you tried to place on me. Apologize for succeeding on my own terms?" Silence stretched between us, thin and brittle. Then, surprisingly, a small laugh from my mother. "You always were stubborn, even as a little girl. Nothing was ever simple with you." "Is that such a bad thing?" I asked, genuinely curious. "To question, to challenge, to want something different?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I don't know how to be the mother of someone like you. I never did." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a complete acknowledgement of the hurt they'd caused. But it was perhaps the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me. A small crack in the facade, a tiny window through which understanding might eventually flow. "Maybe," I suggested gently, "you could start by just listening. Really listening. Without judgment or expectation." "I'll try," she said. And for once I believed her. We set a date for lunch, just the two of us. No Madison, no Dad, no audience for the familiar family drama. I wasn't naive enough to expect miracles, but it was a start. A step toward something new, or at least something different. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened at work. James requested a transfer to another department. Not a demotion, not a step down, just a lateral move that would put some professional distance between us. I approved it without hesitation, understanding the complexity of our situation. What I didn't expect was for him to stop by my office afterward, expression troubled but determined. "Ms. Daniels, Erika," he corrected himself. "I wanted to thank you for your professionalism, for not holding Madison's words against me." I nodded, appreciating his directness. "Like I said, work is work. Family is family." He hesitated then, clearly wrestling with something. "The thing is, Madison showed me what you wrote. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but it affected her more than she's willing to admit." That surprised me. Madison had always been skilled at deflecting anything that challenged her perfect narrative. "How so?" "She asked questions," he said simply, "about your work, your accomplishments, things she should have known about her own sister but didn't. She seemed ashamed, but not in the way she tried to make you feel. Ashamed of herself. I absorbed this, unsure how to feel about it." "People don't change overnight, James." "No," he agreed, "but sometimes they start to see things differently. That's all I wanted to say." He nodded awkwardly and left, closing the door softly behind him. That conversation stayed with me as I worked late into the evening, casting my past and present in a new light. I had spent so long thinking of my family as immovable objects, fixed in their perceptions and judgments. What if they weren't? What if they, like everyone, were capable of growth and change? And more importantly, was I willing to give them the space to try? The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it meant opening myself to potential disappointment again. Liberating because it meant I wasn't the only one who could evolve beyond old patterns and painful histories. That night, I made a decision. I took the journal entry, now an essay, really, and with Nathan's encouragement, submitted it to an online publication focused on professional women's experiences. I removed identifying details, changed names, but kept the emotional core intact. My truth, offered not as a weapon, but as a bridge to others who might be walking similar paths. 1 week later, it was published. By evening, it had been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from women who saw themselves in my words, who had also been diminished by family who couldn't understand their ambitions, who had been labeled difficult or selfish or shameful for wanting more than what tradition prescribed. "I read your piece," Diana, my mentor at Horizon, said when she called me that night. "It's brave what you did. Putting words to something so many of us have felt, but never articulated." "I didn't do it to be brave," I admitted. "I did it because I needed to stop carrying it alone." "That's what bravery often looks like," she replied. "Not grand gestures, just small acts of truth-telling that lift the weight we've been trained to bear in silence." The lunch with my mother happened the following Saturday at a quiet cafe downtown. She looked older somehow, more vulnerable outside the fortress of our family home. We ordered, made small talk about the weather, about her garden, about everything except what mattered. Finally, as our food arrived, she set down her fork and looked at me directly. "I read your article," she said. "A friend shared it without knowing it was you who wrote it. She said it reminded her of how her own mother had treated her." I waited, giving her space to continue. "Is that really how it felt? Like we were ashamed of you?" Her voice wavered slightly. "Yes," I said simply. "Every time my achievements were dismissed. Every time Madison's choices were celebrated and mine were questioned. Every time I was made to feel that my ambition was somehow unfeminine or inappropriate." She flinched at the directness of my answer but didn't look away. "We wanted to protect you," she said finally. "The world is harder on women who don't follow the rules. You thought limiting my dreams would shield me from disappointment," I finished for her. But all it did was teach me that my own family didn't believe in me. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time I could remember, she didn't try to hide them or brush them away with some platitude. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't understand. Maybe I didn't want to." It wasn't everything. It wasn't a complete reckoning with years of subtle and not-so-subtle messages that I was somehow wrong, somehow less, for choosing my own path. But it was genuine, and it was a beginning. "I don't need you to understand all of it," I told her gently. "I just need you to try." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I can do that." We finished our lunch, talking more openly than we had in years. About her fears, about my struggles, about the distance that had grown between us and whether it could ever fully close. It wasn't perfect or complete, but it was real in a way our interactions rarely were. As for Madison, she remained silent for nearly a month after our office meeting. Then, one evening, a text. "Coffee sometime?" Just 2 words. But coming from my sister, they represented a seismic shift. We met at a small shop near my office. She looked different somehow, less polished, more authentic. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail, and her usual immaculate makeup was toned down. "Your article," she began without preamble. "People at my work are sharing it. They don't know it's about us." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that why you wanted to see me? To ask me to take it down?" She shook her head. "No, I wanted to ask. Was I really that bad?" The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the Madison I knew, defensive, perfect, always on the attack. This was someone new, someone asking genuine questions. "It wasn't just you," I said carefully. "It was all of us. The dynamic we created together, the roles we were given, and the ones we chose." She nodded slowly, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "James and I have been talking a lot, about family, about expectations." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "He admires you, you know. Your leadership, your integrity. He said even after the wedding you never once treated him differently." I meant what I said. Personal and professional are separate. "But they're not, are they?" she challenged, surprising me again. "Not really. Who we are follows us everywhere. I've been thinking about that a lot lately." We talked for nearly 2 hours, circling around old hurts and new possibilities. She admitted to jealousy of my freedom, my self-sufficiency, my career, that had soured into resentment over the years. I acknowledged my own bitterness, how I'd sometimes used my success as a shield against their disapproval. "I can't promise things will change overnight," she said as we prepared to leave. "Mom and Dad, they're set in their ways. And honestly, so am I." "I'm not asking for overnight," I told her, "just for effort." She smiled then, a real smile without its usual sharp edges. "I can do effort." We hugged awkwardly, years of distance making even this simple gesture feel foreign. But it was something, a step toward whatever came next. 6 months later, my essay had evolved into a series, then into a book deal. Beyond Shame, Rewriting the Rules of Family and Success became my second job. A passion project that connected me with women around the country who were navigating their own complex family dynamics while pursuing ambitious careers. James settled well into his new department, earning respect on his own merit. Madison and I established a careful, fragile new relationship. Not best friends, maybe not even close, but honest in a way we'd never been before. My parents tried in their way, sometimes succeeding, sometimes falling back into old patterns, but always with a new awareness that made all the difference. And me? I found something I hadn't realized I was missing: community. Not just success, not just achievement, but connection with others who understood the journey. Women who had been called difficult, demanding, different, Women who had refused to shrink, even when it would have been easier. Women who, like me, had been labeled the family shame only to discover that shame transformed into strength when brought into the light. I still run my team at Horizon. I still work long hours and hold high standards. But now I also make time for speaking engagements at women's leadership conferences, for mentoring young women navigating family pressure while pursuing tech careers, for the occasional awkward but improving Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The night my book launched, I held a small celebration at my condo. Nathan was there, and Diana, and a few close colleagues. To my surprise, Madison came too, bringing a small wrapped gift. "It's not much," she said, uncharacteristically shy as I opened it. Inside was a framed photo I'd never seen before, the two of us as very young girls, maybe 5 and 7, playing in a sprinkler in our backyard. Both laughing, both free, before expectations and roles had hardened around us. "Mom found it in an old album," she explained. I thought you might want to remember that we weren't always at odds." I hugged her then, truly hugged her, and for the first time in decades she hugged me back just as tightly. Later that night, after everyone had gone and I was alone with my thoughts, I picked up the photo again. Those two little girls, unaware of the complicated journey ahead. I wondered what they would think of us now. Still imperfect, still learning, but finally finding our way back to something real. The family shame. That's what Madison had called me at her wedding, in a moment of champagne-fueled cruelty that had inadvertently changed everything. Now the phrase appeared on the cover of my book, reclaimed and transformed, not as a wound but as a beginning, because sometimes the labels others give us become the very things that set us free. My name is Erika Daniels, and this is my story. Not of shame, but of courage. Not of rejection, but of reclamation. And if any part of it resonates with you, remember, the most powerful person in your story has always been, and will always be, you, 10 years. That's how long I'd been building a life separate from my family's expectations. A decade of early mornings, late nights, and relentless determination. While Madison was planning her wedding, posting photos of venue tours and cake tastings, I was closing the biggest acquisition in Horizon Tech's history. No fanfare, no congratulatory family dinner, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd earned every step up the corporate ladder. The Monday after the wedding incident, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The encounter with Madison and James had left me unsettled, and work had always been my sanctuary. The familiar rhythm of emails, meetings, and decisions helped push the memory of Madison's words to the background. Until James knocked on my office door at precisely 9:15 a.m. "Ms. Daniels, do you have a moment?" His voice was controlled, professional, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles whitened against the door frame. "Of course, James. Come in." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, a storm of conflicting emotions battled for dominance: embarrassment, anger, vindication. Outside, I was the picture of executive composure. He sat stiffly, hands clasped in his lap. "About Saturday night. We don't need to discuss personal matters in the office, James." I cut him off, more sharply than I'd intended. "With all due respect, Ms. Daniels, I think we do." He met my gaze directly, surprising me with his forthrightness. "What happened at the wedding puts us in a complicated professional situation, one I'd like to address head-on." I studied him for a moment, reassessing. Perhaps there was more to Madison's husband than I'd initially given him credit for. "All right, go on." "I want you to know I had no idea you were Madison's sister until the wedding. She never mentioned what you did for a living, only that you were." He trailed. "Off clearly uncomfortable. Different, difficult, a disappointment?" I supplied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Something like that, he admitted quietly. If I had known you were my supervisor, I would have— What? Treated me with more respect? Insisted Madison do the same? The words escaped before I could stop them. Years of accumulated hurt breaking through my carefully constructed professional facade. James had the grace to look ashamed. I would have at least had context for the family dynamic. I was blindsided, both by learning who you were and by Madison's behavior. I took a steadying breath, regaining my composure. This wasn't who I was at work. Emotional, reactive. This was what my family did to me, even from a distance. They pulled me back into patterns I'd fought hard to escape. James, I said finally, your promotion was based entirely on your performance and potential. Nothing that happened at the wedding changes that. I've always kept my professional assessments separate from personal matters, and I intend to continue doing so. Relief flickered across his face, followed quickly by something more complex. I appreciate that. But there's something else you should know. He hesitated, then continued. Madison and I had an argument after you left. I told her what she did was cruel and unnecessary. I've never seen that side of her before. That caught me off guard. In all our years growing up together, no one had ever called Madison out on her behavior, least of all her boyfriends, who were typically as enchanted by her as our parents were. She was upset, James continued. Said I didn't understand the history, that you'd always made her feel inadequate by being so different. He shook his head slightly. It didn't make sense to me. You're clearly successful, accomplished. Why would that make anyone, especially family, feel anything but proud? Why indeed? It was the question I'd asked myself 1,000 times over. The years. Why couldn't they just be happy for me? Why was my success treated as a personal affront rather than a cause for celebration? Family dynamics are rarely rational, James, I said finally. But I appreciate you standing up for what's right, even if it was uncomfortable. He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I want you to know that whatever is between you and Madison won't affect my work. And I hope— He paused, choosing his words carefully. I hope it won't affect how you see me either. It won't, I assured him. Now, don't you have the Peterson project to finalize? He recognized the dismissal for what it was and stood. Yes, ma'am. You'll have the report by end of day. After he left, I sat motionless for several minutes, replaying the conversation. James had surprised me. In all honesty, I'd expected Madison to choose someone who reflected her values, someone who would instinctively take her side, reinforce her worldview. Instead, she'd married a man with both backbone and principle. It was unexpected. I reached for my phone before I could think better of it, pulling up my sister's number. We hadn't texted directly in months, communicating almost exclusively, through family group chats or holiday cards. My thumb hovered over the screen. What would I even say? Congratulations on marrying someone with actual integrity. Surprise, I'm not the failure you've painted me to be? I set the phone down without sending anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound petty or vindictive. The wedding incident had been humiliating, yes, but it had also been illuminating. For the first time, someone else had witnessed how my family treated me. Someone who, by his own reaction, found it as bewildering as I always had. The validation was both comforting and painful. Comforting to know I wasn't imagining the unfairness. Painful to have it confirmed so publicly. My assistant knocked lightly at the door, reminding me of my 10 a.m. with the development team. I shook off the lingering thoughts of Madison and James, focusing on the day ahead. Work had always been my refuge, the place where my value was recognized without question. I wouldn't let family drama contaminate that, not today. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and deliverables. I stayed late, as was my habit, reviewing quarterly projections until the office had grown quiet and dark, except for the pool of light around my desk. When my phone vibrated with an incoming text at 8:37 p.m., I expected it to be Nathan checking if I wanted to grab a late dinner. Instead, it was my mother. Dad and I are concerned about what happened at the wedding. Madison is very upset. We should talk. No, how are you? No acknowledgement that I might be the one deserving of concern after being publicly humiliated. Just worry for Madison, as always. I put the phone away without responding. Whatever conversation they wanted to have could wait until I wasn't exhausted and emotionally raw. When I finally left the office just after 9, the night air was crisp with early autumn. I walked the 6 blocks to my condo, the city lights blurring slightly as fatigue set in. My building was modern but not ostentatious, glass and steel, with clean lines and a minimalist lobby. The doorman nodded as I entered, and I managed a tired smile in return. Inside my condo, I kicked off my heels and poured a glass of wine, carrying it to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of downtown Denver. The city glittered below, thousands of lights representing thousands of lives, each with their own complicated stories. Somewhere out there, Madison and James were beginning their new life together. Somewhere else, my parents were likely discussing how disappointing I'd been at the wedding, how I'd made Madison's day all about me by simply existing in the same space as her new husband. I took a long sip of wine and closed my eyes. When had it started, this dynamic? I could trace it back to childhood, certainly. Madison as the golden child, me as the square peg. But there must have been a point, a specific moment when they decided I was the problem, the one who needed to be fixed or controlled. Perhaps it was when I was 9 and questioned why boys in my class got science kits for their birthdays while girls got dolls. Or at 12, when I announced I wanted to be an astronaut or a software engineer instead of a teacher or nurse. Maybe it was at 15, when I started taking community college classes after school instead of trying out for cheerleading like Madison had. Each decision I made that deviated from their prescribed path seemed to reinforce their narrative, that I was deliberately difficult, unnecessarily ambitious, fundamentally unsuited for the life they valued. By the time I left for college, the roles were firmly established. Madison as the daughter who made them proud, me as the one who caused them worry. I'd long since stopped trying to change their perception. What was that quote? Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. For years, I'd been burning myself to the ground trying to earn their approval while maintaining my integrity. The wedding incident had simply confirmed what I'd secretly known for years. There was no version of me they would celebrate, not if that version still contained my core self. The realization should have been devastating. Instead, it felt strangely liberating. Like putting down a heavy load I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. My phone vibrated again, another text from my mother. Madison says James has been acting strange since the wedding. Did you say something to him? I laughed bitterly into the empty room. Of course this would be my fault too. I switched my phone to silent and finished my wine, watching the city lights blur through the glass. That night, I dreamed of being back in my childhood home, standing in the kitchen while my family sat at the dining table, talking and laughing as if I wasn't there. I called out to them, but no sound came. I moved toward them, but the distance never closed. I woke just before dawn, a hollow feeling in my chest that coffee and a punishing workout at the gym didn't quite dispel. At work, I threw myself into the daily demands with even more focus than usual. James kept his distance, professional but cautious in our few necessary interactions. By Wednesday, the whispers had started. Nothing overt, just curious glances when I passed groups of employees in the break room, conversations that paused when I approached. Denver's tech community was relatively small and interconnected. Someone at the wedding must have made the connection, between Madison's sister and the director of software development at Horizon Tech. Office gossip had done the rest. Diana, my mentor, and the company's VP of operations stopped by my office late Thursday afternoon. In her mid-50s with silver-streaked dark hair and impeccable suit, she was one of the few women at Horizon who had been there longer than I had. She closed the door behind her without asking, a privilege earned through years of candid guidance. "So," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I hear there was some drama at a wedding last weekend. I should have known Diana would hear about it. Her network of industry connections was legendary. She knew something about everyone in Denver's tech scene, though she rarely traded in gossip for its own sake." "It was nothing," I said, keeping my tone light. "Just an awkward coincidence." She raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Erika, I've known you for 7 years. Nothing doesn't leave you looking like you've been running on coffee and willpower all week." I sighed, setting aside the report I'd been reviewing. Diana had been my champion since I joined Horizon as a junior developer, recognizing potential in me that even I hadn't fully seen. If there was anyone I could be honest with, it was her. "My sister called me the family shame at her wedding," I said finally, right before introducing me to her new husband, who turned out to be James Parker from our development team. Diana's eyes widened slightly. "Well, that's certainly an introduction." "Indeed." "And how did Mr. Parker handle this revelation?" "Better than expected," I admitted. "He was shocked, of course, but he's been professional. Apparently, he even called my sister out on her behavior afterward." Diana nodded thoughtfully. "Good for him. And how are you handling it?" I started to give my standard answer. Fine, handling it, moving forward. But something in Diana's steady gaze made me pause. "Honestly, I'm tired. Tired of being the villain in my family's story just because I chose a different path." "I understand that better than you might think," she said quietly. "When I started in this industry 30 years ago, my mother couldn't understand why I wouldn't just marry my college boyfriend and start a family like my sisters. Every time I got a promotion, she'd ask if it meant I'd finally have time to settle down properly." "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious. Diana rarely spoke about her personal life. She smiled wryly. "She got sick when I was in my early 40s. Cancer. I took a leave of absence to care for her, and during those months, she saw what I actually did with my life. Not just the career, but the mentoring, the community work, the relationships I'd built. She told me just before she passed that she was proud of me, that she'd been wrong to measure my life by such a narrow standard." She paused, a shadow crossing her face. "Not everyone gets that resolution, though." "No," I agreed, thinking of my own parents' steadfast commitment to their disappointment in me. "I don't think my family is capable of that kind of insight." "Maybe, maybe not," Diana shrugged. "But here's what I've learned, Erika. You can't control how others see you, but you can control how their perception affects you. Your worth isn't determined by their recognition of it." It was advice I'd given myself 100 times, but somehow hearing it from Diana made it feel more substantial, more possible. "The other thing," she continued, leaning forward slightly, "is that you're not alone in this experience. So many women in positions like ours have similar stories. We just don't talk about it enough." That struck a chord. Throughout my career, I'd focused solely on professional development, skills, knowledge, performance. I'd never sought connection through shared personal challenges. It had always seemed safer, cleaner, to keep those worlds separate. "Thank you," I said finally, "for the perspective." She stood, straightening her jacket. "Any time. Now, are you coming to the leadership dinner tomorrow night? The board will be there, and they're still deciding who'll head the new AI division." "I'll be there," I promised, grateful for her seamless transition back to business. After Diana left, I found myself returning to something she'd said. "You're not alone in this experience." It wasn't just a comforting platitude, it was a reality I'd never fully considered. How many other women had stories like mine? How many were carrying similar wounds while projecting unflappable confidence in boardrooms and budget meetings? That evening, instead of staying late at the office, I met Nathan for dinner at our favorite Italian place downtown. Nathan had been my friend since college, one of the few people who knew both pre-success Erika and director Daniels. He was already at our usual corner table when I arrived, 2 glasses of Chianti waiting. "You look exhausted," he said by way of greeting as I slid into my seat. "Thanks. Just the morale boost I needed," I replied dryly, taking a grateful sip of wine. "That's what friends are for." He grinned, then grew more serious. "How are you really doing, after the wedding fiasco?" I considered deflecting, giving the sanitized version I'd been presenting to colleagues. But this was Nathan. He'd seen me through breakups, career setbacks, and that disastrous attempt at bangs in our senior year. "It was humiliating," I admitted, standing there while Madison called me the family shame, watching the recognition dawn on James's face. For a moment, I felt like I was 12 again. The weird sister, the disappointment, the one who couldn't just follow the rules. Nathan's expression darkened. "Your family has always had a gift for making your success sound like some kind of character flaw." "The thing is," I continued, picking at the bread the server had placed between us, "part of me thought that by now they'd have come around, that my career, my life, would have proven something to them. But they're still waiting for me to fail or give up or admit they were right." "And how did the new brother-in-law take it? Finding out his boss is the black sheep sister-in-law?" "Surprisingly well," I said, recounting my conversation with James. "He seems genuinely confused by my family's attitude, which actually made me feel better, in a strange way. Like maybe I'm not crazy for thinking their behavior is bizarre." Nathan raised his glass. "To outside perspective, sometimes it takes a stranger to confirm what we already know." We clinked glasses, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Nathan's latest disastrous Tinder date, the new exhibit at the art museum, plans for the upcoming ski season. By the time we finished dinner, I felt more grounded than I had all week. As we waited for the check, Nathan fixed me with one of his perceptive looks. "You know what I think you should do? Write about this." "Write about what? My dysfunctional family?" "About the expectation that successful women should be apologetic about their ambition, about how families often punish the members who challenge their norms. You're not the only one going through this, Erika." It was eerily similar to what Diana had said earlier. "I'm a software developer, not a writer," I protested. "You're a communicator who happens to work in tech," he countered. "Remember those email newsletters you used to write for the women in STEM group in college? People connected with those. They saw themselves in your experiences." I did remember. Those newsletters had started as a simple update on club activities, but had evolved into something more personal. Observations about being one of the few women in advanced programming classes, strategies for dealing with dismissive professors, celebrations of small victories. I'd stopped writing them after graduation, focused entirely on launching my career. "Just think about it," Nathan said as we left the restaurant. "Sometimes the stories we need most are the ones we've been too busy living to tell." That night, I couldn't sleep. Nathan's suggestion kept circling in my mind, colliding with Diana's words and James's confused reaction to my family's behavior. There was a pattern here, a common thread I'd been too close to see clearly. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep, padding to my home office in bare feet and an oversized t-shirt. I opened my laptop and created a new document. No title, no plan, just a blank page waiting for words. I began typing, not sure what would emerge. The first time I realized my ambition was seen as a problem, I was 14 years old. The words came easily, flowing from some deep reservoir I hadn't tapped in years. I wrote about growing up as the odd one out, about watching Madison receive praise for conformity while my differences were treated as deliberate defiance. I wrote about the subtle and not-so-subtle ways my parents had communicated that my path was wrong, misguided, doomed to leave me lonely and unfulfilled. I wrote about the wedding, about standing frozen as Madison labeled me the family shame, about the strange vindication of James's recognition. By the time dawn lightened the sky outside my window, I had written over 5,000 words. It wasn't polished or structured, just raw truth poured onto the page. I saved the document, closed my laptop, and finally slept for a few hours before my alarm pulled me back to the workday. Friday passed in a blur of meetings and preparations for the leadership dinner. I reviewed my presentation one final time, chose a navy blue suit that projected both confidence and approachability, and pushed thoughts of family drama to the back of my mind. Tonight was about work, about the future of Horizon Tech, about the AI division I hoped to lead. The dinner was held at one of Denver's premier restaurants, a place where the lighting was perfect and the wait staff appeared and disappeared with practiced invisibility. I arrived exactly on time, exchanging pleasantries with board members and fellow executives as we were shown to our private dining room. I was making my way toward my assigned seat when a familiar voice stopped me cold. "Erika, what are you doing here?" I turned slowly to find James standing just inside the doorway, looking as shocked as I felt. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Clearly he was working the event, not just attending as a guest. "I'm part of the leadership team," I said, keeping my voice level despite the unexpected encounter. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here? This dinner is usually just executives and board members." Before he could answer, Diana appeared at my elbow. "Ah, I see you two have found each other. James is presenting the technical overview of the AI project. I hope that's not a problem?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. She knew exactly what she was doing, testing both of us, our professionalism, our ability to separate personal history from business necessity. "Of course not," I said smoothly. "James's technical expertise will be valuable to the discussion." James nodded, his expression equally composed. "I look forward to the presentation, Director Daniels." As Diana moved away to greet a board member, James leaned slightly closer. "I didn't know you were up for the AI division leadership," he said quietly. "There are a lot of things you don't know about me," I replied, unable to keep a hint of edge from my voice. Something flashed in his eyes. Not anger, but a kind of determination. "No, there aren't. I did my research after the wedding. You have 3 patents to your name. You led the team that developed Horizon's most successful product to date. You guest lecture at Denver Tech on women in STEM." He paused, meeting my gaze directly. "The question is, why doesn't your own sister know any of that?" I had no answer for him. No one in my family had ever bothered to learn these details of my professional life. They existed in a carefully maintained bubble where my work was some abstract thing, important enough to make me miss family gatherings, not important enough to discuss when I did attend. "We should take our seats," I said, instead of addressing his question. "The dinner is about to begin." The evening proceeded. According to plan, excellent food, strategic conversation, presentations delivered with polished professionalism. James's technical overview was impressive, clear, thorough, forward-thinking. I found myself nodding along, genuinely appreciative of his insights, despite our complicated personal connection. When my turn came, I presented my vision for the AI division with the confident authority I'd spent years cultivating. I could feel James watching me from across the table, his expression thoughtful. The board members asked challenging questions, which I answered directly and comprehensively. By the time dessert was served, I could sense the shift in the room, the subtle indicators that my proposal had landed well, that my leadership was being seriously considered. As the dinner wound down, I found myself in conversation with the board chair, a formidable woman in her 60s who had been one of the first female executives in Denver's tech industry. We were discussing implementation timelines when I noticed James speaking with Diana near the door, both of them glancing occasionally in my direction. "You know," the board chair said, following my gaze, "that young man has quite a future ahead of him. His technical expertise combined with your strategic vision could be exactly what this division needs." I turned back to her, surprised. "You're suggesting we co-lead?" She smiled slightly. "I'm suggesting you consider all available talent when building your team, particularly talent that complements your strengths." She patted my arm and moved away to say her goodbyes, leaving me with the distinct impression that the AI division was mine if I wanted it, with the caveat that James would play a significant role. As I gathered my things to leave, James approached, his expression guarded but determined. "Director Daniels, do you have a moment?" I nodded, stepping slightly away from the departing guests for privacy. "I want to be clear about something," he said, his voice low but firm. "What happened at the wedding, Madison's behavior, my surprise, that has nothing to do with how I see you professionally. I've admired your work since I joined Horizon. I would be honored to work with you on the AI division, in whatever capacity." His directness caught me off guard. "Thank you, James. Your presentation tonight was excellent. There's something else." He hesitated, then continued. "Madison doesn't know I'm here tonight. She doesn't know much about my work at all, actually. It's not that I keep it from her, she just doesn't ask." He met my gaze. "I'm starting to understand some things about your family dynamic that I didn't before." In that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Recognition, not just of my position or accomplishments, but of the struggle behind them. Of the cost. Of being different in a family that valued sameness above all else. "It's complicated," I said finally. An understatement so profound it almost made me laugh. "Family usually is," he agreed. "But just so you know, I don't think you're the family." "Shame. I think you're exactly who you were meant to be." With that, he nodded once and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the emptying dining room, his words echoing in my mind. "I think you're exactly who you were meant to be." How strange that the first person in my family circle to truly see me was someone who hadn't even known I existed a week ago. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurring around me, I felt a subtle shift in my perception. Not just of my family, but of myself. For years, I'd been fighting two battles: to succeed professionally despite the obstacles women in tech faced, and to maintain my sense of self-worth despite my family's constant undermining. I'd been so focused on proving them wrong that I hadn't fully appreciated how much I'd already proven myself right. The document I'd written in the early hours of the morning waited on my laptop. I thought about Nathan's suggestion to share my story, about Diana's assertion that I wasn't alone in my experience, about James's confused question, "Why doesn't your own sister know any of that?" Perhaps it was time to stop waiting for my family to recognize my worth and instead connect with those who already did, and with those who might find in my journey a reflection of their own. When I reached my condo, instead of heading straight to bed, I opened my laptop and began to revise what I'd written. Not just a personal catharsis now, but a deliberate sharing of experience. A hand reached out in the darkness, saying, "If this is your story too, you're not alone." I worked until the sky began to lighten, shaping my raw words into something structured, something that might resonate beyond my own experience. When I finally finished, I titled the document, "The Family: Shame on Ambition, Expectation, and Finding Your Own Path." I sat back, exhausted but oddly peaceful, and reached for my phone. There were 3 missed calls from my mother and a text from Madison. "We need to talk about you and James." I set the phone down without responding. Whatever conversation they wanted to have would wait until I was ready, until I could approach it from this new place of clarity, this understanding that their perception of me had never been the truth, just their limited interpretation of a story they hadn't bothered to read fully. For the first time in years, I felt truly free of the weight of their disappointment. Not because it had disappeared, but because I'd finally recognized it for what it was. A reflection of their limitations, not mine. Tomorrow, I would face whatever came next, the fallout from the wedding, the decision about the AI division, the complicated reality of having James as both colleague and brother-in-law. But tonight, in these quiet hours between midnight and dawn, I had reclaimed something essential: the right to define my own success, to tell my own story, to be exactly who I was meant to be. And that, I realized, was the most ambitious achievement of all. Monday morning brought a message from HR confirming what the board chair had implied at Friday's dinner. I would be heading the new AI division, with James Parker as technical lead, reporting directly to me. The official announcement would go out company-wide by end of day. I sat at my desk, coffee cooling beside me, and contemplated the complexity of the situation. James would be working closely with me, unavoidably entangling our professional and personal worlds despite my best efforts to keep them separate. I was still processing this when my office phone rang. My assistant's voice came through, oddly hesitant. "Ms. Daniels, there's a Madison Parker here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." My stomach tightened. Of course, Madison would show up unannounced, assuming her convenience trumped my schedule. "Tell her I'm in meetings all morning," I replied automatically. There was a brief pause. "She says she'll wait." Of course she would. Madison had always excelled at getting her way through sheer persistence. I glanced at my calendar. Back-to-back meetings until 2 p.m., then prep for the division announcement. "Fine. Tell her I can spare 5 minutes now, but that's all." Moments later, my office door opened and Madison swept in. She looked immaculate as always. Designer jeans, cashmere sweater, not a hair out of place despite the October wind outside. But there was something different in her expression, a tightness around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Erika," she said, remaining standing even as I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "We need to talk about James." "No, hello." "No, how are you?" No acknowledgement of her behavior at the wedding. Typical Madison, straight to what mattered to her. "I have 5 minutes, Madison. What about James?" She crossed her arms, her wedding ring catching the light. "He's been acting strange since the wedding, distant, working late. Now I find out he's presenting at some executive dinner I knew nothing about." Her gaze sharpened. "What did you say to him?" I leaned back in my chair, momentarily stunned by her audacity. "Let me make sure I understand. You publicly call me the family shame at your wedding, discover your new husband works for me, and your concern is what I might have said to him?" A flush crept up her neck. "That was just a joke, Erika. You've always been so sensitive." "A joke." I repeated the words carefully, testing their weight. "Tell me, what exactly was the punchline? That I chose a different path than the one you and Mom and Dad prescribed? That I've built a life and career on my own terms? Please, explain the humor to me." She shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I didn't come here to argue about the wedding. I came because something's wrong with James, and it started after he met you. James is a valued employee who's about to take on significant new responsibilities," I said, keeping my voice level. "If he's been preoccupied, perhaps that's why." Her eyes widened slightly. "New responsibilities? What does that mean?" I glanced at the clock. 3 minutes of my allotted 5 gone already. "Madison, James's career is between him and Horizon Tech. If you want to know about his work, ask him." I've tried. He just says it's complicated that I wouldn't understand the technical details. Frustration colored her voice. Which is ridiculous because I'm not stupid. I just don't care about computers and coding and all that boring stuff. And there it was, the casual dismissal I'd heard my entire life. My work, my passions, my achievements all reduced to boring stuff, not worth understanding. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity why James hadn't shared details of his promotion with Madison. She'd never shown interest in his work because it resembled mine, and anything associated with me was automatically deemed unworthy of attention. "Your 5 minutes are up," I said, rising from my chair. "I have a meeting to attend." She didn't move. "That's it? You're just dismissing me?" Typical Erika, always thinking your work is more important than family. Something snapped inside. Me, a tether I hadn't even realized was still holding me to old patterns, old pain. "Yes, Madison. Right now, my work is more important than this conversation. Not because work matters more than family in some abstract sense, but because this particular interaction isn't about family at all. It's about you wanting something and expecting me to provide it, regardless of the cost to me." She blinked, taken aback by my directness. "That's not fair." "No, it's not," I agreed. "None of it has been fair. Not the way you and our parents have treated me for years. Not the way you humiliated me at your wedding. Not the way you've barged into my office demanding information while offering no apology." I moved toward the door, holding it open. "When you're ready to have an actual conversation, one that acknowledges the reality of our relationship rather than the fiction you've constructed, I'll be here. Until then, please make an appointment next time." Madison stood frozen for a moment, her perfect composure fracturing around the edges. Then, without another word, she swept past me and out the door, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in her wake. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart racing despite my outwardly calm demeanor. In all our years of strained interaction, I had never spoken to Madison that directly. I had pushed back in small ways, asserted boundaries with careful precision, but I had never simply named the dynamic for what it was. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. My phone buzzed, with a reminder, executive team meeting in 5 minutes. I took a deep breath, gathered my notes, and headed to the conference room, pushing thoughts of Madison to the back of my mind. The skill of compartmentalization had served me well throughout my career, never more so than now. The rest of the day passed in a blur of logistics and preparation. The official announcement about the AI division went out at 4 p.m., my inbox immediately flooding with congratulations from colleagues and industry connections. James sent a brief professional email expressing his enthusiasm for our collaboration. No mention of Madison's visit, though I suspected he knew about it. By the time I left the office, evening was settling over Denver, the October air crisp, with the promise of the coming winter. I decided to walk home, needing the physical movement to process the day's events. My phone rang just as I was crossing the street from my building, Nathan's name lighting up the screen. "Congratulations, Division Director," he said when I answered. "This calls for celebration. I'm thinking that Thai place you love, followed by inappropriately expensive bourbon at the whiskey room." I smiled despite my exhaustion. "How did you even know already? The announcement just went out a few hours ago." "Please, I have my sources. So dinner? Or are you too important for your old friends now?" "I'm never too important for pad thai and bourbon. Meet you there at 8? "Perfect. And Erika, I'm really proud of you." Those 5 simple words, "I'm really proud of you," hit me with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone in my family had said that to me? Had they ever? I showered and changed, opting for jeans and a soft sweater rather than another business outfit. Nathan was already at our favorite Thai restaurant when I arrived, 2 glasses of wine waiting on the table. To the new AI division director, he said, raising his glass. May your algorithms be efficient and your neural networks deeply layered. I laughed, clinking my glass against his. That might be the nerdiest toast I've ever heard. Coming from you, that's quite the compliment. He grinned, then his expression grew more serious. So how does it feel? Getting everything you've worked for? I considered the question, taking a sip of wine. Satisfying, challenging, a little surreal. I paused. Incomplete, somehow. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Incomplete? You're heading a cutting-edge division at one of the most respected tech companies in the region. What's missing? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe it's just that there's no one to share it with. Not really. Hello? Sitting right here, he protested, gesturing to himself. You know what I mean. You're amazing, Nathan, but you're not. Family, he finished for me. Have you heard from them since the wedding? I told him about Madison's unexpected visit, her accusations, my uncharacteristically direct response. It felt good to finally say it all out loud, I concluded. But also strange, like I was breaking some unspoken rule we've all agreed to follow for decades. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. The rule of, we don't talk about how we treat Erika. Classic toxic family dynamics. He leaned forward, wine forgotten. You know what I think? I think that document you wrote, you should publish it. What? Just put my family drama out there for everyone to see? That seems extreme. Not as some revenge tell-all. As a thoughtful exploration of family expectations, professional women, the cost of being different. You said yourself you wrote it to connect with others who might have similar experiences. Our food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As we ate, I turned Nathan's suggestion over in my mind. Part of me recoiled at the idea of exposing such personal material publicly. Another part recognized the potential value in sharing. These experiences, in creating the resource I wished I'd had during those lonely years of feeling like the only one who didn't fit the prescribed mold. I'd have to edit it, I said finally. Make it less specific, more universal. Nathan's eyes lit up. So, you're considering it? Maybe. I don't know. I took another bite of pad thai, changing the subject. Did I tell you James is going to be my technical lead? Your brother-in-law is reporting directly to you? That's not complicated at all, Nathan said, voice heavy with sarcasm. How's that going to work? Professionally, I think it will be fine. He's genuinely talented, and we seem to have an unspoken agreement to keep work and family separate. I twirled noodles around my fork. It's everything else that's complicated. Madison showing up at my office today, demanding to know what I said to him. My parents inevitably getting involved once they hear about the promotion. The holiday season, looming with all its forced family togetherness. You could skip the holidays this year, Nathan suggested. Come to Aspen with me and Sarah. Her family rented a ridiculous chalet that sleeps 12, but somehow only 5 people are coming. The offer was tempting. Nathan's girlfriend Sarah came from a warm, boisterous family that had welcomed me on the few occasions we'd met. A Christmas. Free from the subtle digs and disappointed sighs of my own family sounded like a gift I desperately wanted to give myself. Let me think about it, I said. It's still October. Maybe things will improve by December. Nathan gave me a skeptical look but didn't push. After dinner, we moved to the whiskey room as planned, settling into a quiet corner with glasses of 18-year-old bourbon. The amber liquid burned pleasantly going down, warming me from the inside as Nathan kept the conversation light, sharing stories from his work as a graphic designer and making me laugh with his spot-on impressions of difficult clients. It was nearly midnight when we parted ways, the night air now genuinely cold as I hugged him goodbye. Thanks for tonight, I said, meaning it. I needed this more than I realized. That's what I'm here for, bourbon, bad jokes, and occasional wisdom. He squeezed my shoulder. Think about what I said, though. About publishing your piece. Your story matters, Erika. It could help people. Those words followed me home, echoing in my mind as I prepared for bed. Your story matters. Such a simple statement, yet so contrary to everything my family had communicated through their actions over the years. To them, my story had always been an inconvenient deviation from the narrative they preferred, a disruption to be minimized, ignored, or rewritten to fit their expectations. What would it mean to claim that my story mattered? To assert that my path, though different, was valuable not despite, but because of its divergence from the expected? What would it mean to offer that perspective to others struggling with similar dynamics? Sleep eluded me, my mind too full of questions without clear answers. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying, moving to my home office where the document still waited on my laptop. I reread what I'd written in that late-night burst of honesty, seeing both its raw power and its rough edges. With fresh eyes, I began to edit. Not to dilute or sanitize, but to clarify and strengthen. To shape personal experience into something that might resonate beyond my specific circumstances. By the time dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I had transformed the document into something I was almost ready to share. I saved the file, finally sleeping for a few hours before my alarm pulled me back to the workday. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as I set up the new AI division. James proved to be an excellent technical lead, his knowledge of the field impressive, and his management style complementary to mine. We established a productive working relationship, neither of us mentioning the complex personal connection that hovered just beyond our professional interactions. Then came the email from my father on a Wednesday afternoon. Subject line, Thanksgiving plans. The message was brief, almost terse. Your mother and I expect you to attend Thanksgiving dinner this year. Madison and James will be there. It's time to put this wedding nonsense behind us and act like a family. Dinner at 3 p.m. Not an invitation, an expectation. No acknowledgement of my promotion, though I was certain they knew about it by now. No recognition that the wedding nonsense had been a public humiliation engineered by their golden child. Just the same old assumption that I would comply with their demands, subordinating my feelings to the facade of family harmony. In the past, I would have accepted the invitation with resigned dread, preparing myself for an afternoon of subtle slights and invalidation. This time, I found myself hesitating, Nathan's offer of an alternative Thanksgiving in Aspen suddenly more appealing. What would happen if I simply declined? If I prioritized my own well-being over their expectations for once? The thought was both liberating and anxiety-inducing. Breaking patterns established over decades never came without cost, but continuing those patterns exacted its own price, one I was increasingly unwilling to pay. I was still contemplating. My response when Diana stopped by my office late that afternoon, closing the door behind her. The team's making excellent progress, she said, settling into the chair across from me. James Parker in particular seems to be thriving under your leadership. He's talented, I acknowledged, and motivated. I think the division will be ready to launch our first project ahead of schedule. Diana studied me for a moment, her perceptive gaze missing nothing. And yet something's troubling you, professional or personal? I smiled ruefully. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's known you as long as I have. She leaned back, waiting. I hesitated, then decided to trust her with the truth. My father emailed about Thanksgiving. The usual family obligation, wrapped in the expectation that I'll pretend the incident at Madison's wedding never happened. Ah, Diana nodded. Family holidays, the annual exercise in emotional endurance. Exactly. And I'm trying to decide if I should just go through with it as always, or... I trailed off. Or prioritize your own well-being for once. She finished for me. Novel concept. It feels selfish somehow, I admitted, even though logically, I know it's not. Diana considered this, her expression thoughtful. Let me ask you something, Erika. If one of your team members came to you and described this exact situation, being publicly humiliated by a sibling, receiving no apology, then being expected to show up and play happy family, what would you advise them? The question brought me up short. I'd tell them they deserve better treatment. That they're not obligated to put themselves in situations where they're devalued or disrespected, even by family, especially by family. And yet you hold yourself to a different standard, she observed. Why is that? It was a penetrating question, one that cut to the heart of patterns established so long ago I hardly questioned them anymore. I suppose because I've always been the one who had to adapt, I said slowly. The one who was different, difficult, demanding, taking up space in ways they found uncomfortable. After a while, you internalize that narrative. You start to believe that maybe you are asking for too much when you expect basic respect. Diana's expression softened slightly. That's how it works, isn't it? We absorb these messages until they become our own thoughts, our own limitations. She leaned forward. Can I share something personal with you? I nodded, surprised by the offer. Diana rarely spoke about her life outside Horizon. When I was in my 30s, newly promoted to my first executive role, my mother became seriously ill, she began. I flew home every weekend for months to help care for her, constantly exhausted, but doing what good daughters do. One Sunday, as I was preparing to leave for the airport, my father took me aside and said, "Diana, your mother and I are disappointed in you." She paused, the memory clearly still sharp despite the decades since. I was stunned. I'd been working 60-hour weeks, then flying across the country to spend every weekend changing bedsheets and managing medications. I asked what more they expected me to do. A sad smile crossed her face. He said, "We're disappointed you chose this career that keeps you so busy. Your sister would have moved home to care for her mother properly." The story landed with painful familiarity. "What did you do?" I asked quietly. "I went back to my life," Diana said simply. "I continued visiting when I could, sending the best care when I couldn't be there myself. I stopped trying to earn approval that was fundamentally contingent on me being someone else." She met my gaze directly. It wasn't easy. There were times I felt terribly selfish, terribly inadequate. But gradually, I realized that their disappointment wasn't really about me at all. It was about their inability to expand their vision of what a good daughter, a good woman, a good life could look like. The parallels to my own situation were unmistakable. Did it get better? Your relationship with them? Diana considered the question. It got more honest. My father never fully understood my choices, but eventually he stopped expecting me to apologize for them. We found a way to connect around what we could share, rather than constantly battling over what we couldn't. She stood, straightening, her jacket. All of which is to say, you don't have to make a decision about Thanksgiving today, but whatever you decide, make it from a place of self-respect, not self-sacrifice. After she left, I sat for a long time looking out my office window at the Denver skyline, the sun setting behind the mountains in the distance. Diana's story resonated deeply, reflecting patterns so similar to my own experience that it was almost uncanny. The shared nature of these dynamics, the way certain kinds of families responded to women who defied expectations, suddenly seemed less like a personal failing and more like a societal pattern I had been caught in. My computer dinged with an incoming email, a message from a small but respected online publication focusing on women in business. 3 weeks earlier, on an impulse of courage fueled by Nathan's encouragement, I had submitted an edited version of my late-night writing session, now titled The Family Shame: Navigating Success When Your Path Defies Expectations. The editor's message was brief but enthusiastic. Ms. Daniels, we would be honored to publish your piece in our November issue. Your exploration of family dynamics and professional identity resonates powerfully and addresses issues many of our readers face. Please let me know if you're comfortable proceeding with publication. My finger hovered over the keyboard. Publishing the piece would make public what had always been private: the painful dynamics, the ongoing struggle for validation, the recent confrontation at Madison's wedding. It would be a clear statement that these experiences mattered, that they deserved to be examined rather than hidden away in shame. It would also be irreversible. Once published, my perspective would be out there for anyone to read, including, potentially, my family. The thought made my stomach tighten with anxiety, but also with a strange sense of relief. Perhaps it was time for the unspoken to be spoken, for the hidden costs of conformity to be brought into the light. I typed a simple response. Yes, I'm comfortable proceeding with publication. Thank you for the opportunity to share this perspective. As I hit send, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the burden of silence, of complicity in my own diminishment. Whatever came next, I had taken a step toward authenticity, toward claiming the validity of my own experience. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. That evening, I finally responded to my father's email about Thanksgiving. I appreciate the invitation, but I won't be attending this year. I've made other plans. I hope you all enjoy the holiday. Simple, direct, unapologetic. No elaborate excuse, no promise to make it up to them later. Just a clear boundary set with calm conviction. His response came within minutes. Your mother will be disappointed. 3 generations of family guilt distilled into 5 words. In the past, that statement alone would have been enough to make me reconsider, to prioritize their comfort over my own. This time, I simply acknowledged it. I understand, I'll call her next week. Then I texted Nathan. Still room at that Aspen chalet for Thanksgiving? His reply was immediate and enthusiastic. Always room for you. Sarah will be thrilled. Fair warning, her family is loud and there will be karaoke. I smiled, imagining a holiday filled with laughter and music instead of tension and unspoken resentments. A Thanksgiving where I could simply be a guest, not a disappointment. Sounds perfect, I replied. I'm in. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, as if the simple act of choosing myself had unlocked a deeper peace. The path ahead wasn't clear or easy. There would be fallout from declining Thanksgiving, from publishing my piece, from continuing to assert boundaries with my family. But for perhaps the first time, I felt fully committed to navigating that path with integrity rather than compromise. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. James would still be my brother-in-law and my direct report. Madison would still be my sister, carrying her own complex emotions about our relationship. My parents would still expect me to eventually fall in line with their vision of family obligation. The patterns of a lifetime wouldn't disappear overnight. But something fundamental had shifted. I had stopped seeing myself through their limited lens and started trusting my own perspective. I had found voices, Diana's, Nathan's, soon those of readers who might see themselves in my words, that reflected back a different truth than the one my family had always insisted upon. The family shame. Madison had meant it as an insult, a reminder of my failure to conform. Instead, it had become a catalyst for claiming my own narrative, for connecting with others who understood the courage it took to forge an authentic path in the face of disapproval. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought of all the women like me, carrying similar wounds from families that couldn't celebrate their ambition or independence. Women taught to shrink, to apologize, to doubt the validity of their own choices. Women navigating the complex terrain between professional success and personal belonging, For them, for us, I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to silence it again. November in Denver brought the first real snow, transforming the city into a landscape of white-dusted buildings and crystalline air. I watched it fall from my office window, the soft flakes a stark contrast to the heated email that had just landed in my inbox. My mother had finally responded to my Thanksgiving declination, her message a masterclass in passive-aggressive guilt. Erika, I can't pretend. I'm not hurt by your decision to abandon family tradition for a holiday with strangers. Your father is taking it personally, though he won't admit it. Madison was hoping to use this opportunity to mend fences. James will be disappointed not to see you. I suppose we'll manage somehow, though it won't be the same with an empty chair at the table. Every sentence calculated for maximum emotional impact, every word designed to make me reconsider. In the past, it would have worked. I would have canceled my Aspen plans, apologized profusely, and shown up at their doorstep bearing expensive wine and a forced smile. But as I reread her message, I felt only a distant sadness rather than the crushing guilt she intended to provoke. I was composing a measured response when a knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. James stood in the doorway, tablet in hand, expression professional but strained. "The prototype testing results are in," he said, holding up the tablet. "Do you have a moment to review them?" "Of course," I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Everything on track?" He sat, pulling up the data with efficient taps. "The core algorithms are performing above expectations. We're seeing a 23% improvement in prediction accuracy compared to our benchmark." He handed me the tablet, our fingers briefly touching in the exchange. I focused on the screen, scanning the graphs and metrics with practiced ease. "This is excellent work, James. The board will be impressed." "The team deserves the credit," he said modestly, "especially Chen and Ramirez. They found an innovative approach to the neural network architecture that made a significant difference." I nodded, making a mental note to recognize those team members specifically. "Speaking of the team, how's morale? The deadline pressure is only going to increase as we get closer to launch." "Strong overall. Everyone's excited about the project's potential." He hesitated, then added, "There has been some curiosity about our connection. Word gets around in tech circles." I returned the tablet, meeting his gaze directly. "Has it affected your ability to lead the team?" "No," he said firmly. "I've made it clear our professional relationship is separate from any family ties." "Good." I paused, debating whether to broach the personal topic that hovered between us. Professional boundaries would suggest avoiding it entirely, but the unique circumstances made strict separation impossible. "I should tell you that I've declined Thanksgiving with the family this year." Surprise flickered across his face, quickly masked. "I see. Madison mentioned she was expecting you." "I've made other plans," I said simply, offering no further explanation. He nodded, accepting this without question. "The testing report has been uploaded to the shared drive. Should I schedule a full team review for tomorrow morning?" "Yes. 10 a.m. should work." I appreciated his swift return to business matters, the unspoken agreement to maintain professional boundaries. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Erika," he said, my first name sounding odd in our work context. "For what it's worth, I think healthy boundaries are important, even with family, maybe especially with family." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me to wonder what conversations had been happening in the Parker household since Madison's visit to my office. Had James defended me, challenged her perspective, or simply maintained a diplomatic silence? It was impossible to know, and ultimately not my concern. Whatever dynamics existed in their marriage were for them to navigate, just as my relationship with my family was my responsibility alone. I returned to my mother's email, crafting a response. That was polite but firm. "I understand you're disappointed by my decision. This year, I need to take care of myself in ways that make a traditional family gathering difficult. I hope you all enjoy the holiday, and I'll call next week to check in. No apology, no detailed justification, no promise to make it up to them later. Just the truth, simply stated. This year, I was choosing myself. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of meetings and decisions, the momentum of the AI project carrying me forward. By evening, as I prepared to leave the office, my phone buzzed with a notification from the online publication. Your piece, The Family Shame, is scheduled for publication this Friday. Final approval needed by EOD tomorrow. A flutter of anxiety passed through me. Friday, just 2 days away. Once published, there would be no taking it back, no pretending these thoughts and feelings remained private. I took a deep breath and replied, "Approved for Friday publication. Thank you." As I drove home through the snowy streets, I wondered, who might read the piece? Colleagues, perhaps. Friends like Nathan who knew aspects of my family dynamic. Maybe even other women in the industry who had faced similar challenges. What I didn't expect was what came next. Thursday passed without incident. The workday consumed by project details and team management. Friday morning dawned clear and cold. The sky a brilliant blue against the snow-covered mountains visible from my condo windows. I checked my email over coffee, finding the promised link from the publication. The Family Shame, Navigating Success. When Your Path Defies Expectations, by Erika Daniels, was now live. I clicked through, seeing my words displayed in clean typography against a professional layout. It was strange to see such personal revelations presented so formally, like intimate diary entries suddenly framed on a gallery wall. The piece detailed my experiences growing up as the odd one out, the constant, subtle undermining of my choices, the wedding incident that had crystallized decades of family dynamics, and my journey toward claiming my own narrative. I hadn't named my family members directly, using only my sister and my parents, rather than specific names. I'd kept the focus on the emotional impact and broader patterns rather than petty grievances. Still, anyone who knew us would recognize the situation immediately. I closed the tab, oddly calm. What was done was done. Whatever ripples the publication created, I would handle them with the same measured approach I brought to professional challenges. By mid-morning, the piece had garnered a few comments and shares, mostly from women expressing gratitude for the articulation of experiences they recognized but had rarely seen discussed openly. I was reviewing these responses during a brief break when Diana appeared at my door, tablet in hand. "Have you seen this?" she asked without preamble, placing the tablet on my desk. I glanced down to see a social media post from Madison, posted just 30 minutes earlier. When your own sister airs family business publicly for attention and professional gain, some of us value privacy and loyalty over viral moments. Disappointed doesn't begin to cover it. Family matters. Some things are private. My stomach tightened. It had taken Madison less than 4 hours to find the piece and respond publicly, turning private hurt into social media fodder, exactly what she was accusing me of doing. "It's already circulating in certain circles," Diana said carefully. "Not widely, but enough that you should be aware." I nodded, maintaining my composure. "Thank you for letting me know." She studied me for a moment. "Do you want to discuss how to handle this from a company perspective? There could be implications with James's position." "I don't think that's necessary," I said, more confidently than I felt. The piece is professional and touches on themes many women in leadership face. I didn't name anyone specifically. If asked, the company line can simply be that Horizon values diverse perspectives and experiences among its leadership team. Diana nodded, seemingly satisfied with this approach. For what it's worth, I thought the piece was excellent, brave, and important. She paused. "Just be prepared. Family rarely reacts well to having their dynamics exposed, even indirectly. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a text from my father. "Your mother is in tears. Call immediately." I set the phone aside without responding. Whatever conversation needed to happen with my parents, it wouldn't be happening in the middle of my workday, and it certainly wouldn't be on their terms. Diana noticed the gesture, a knowing look crossing her face. "Establishing boundaries isn't the same as building walls," she said quietly. "Remember that as you navigate this next phase. The goal isn't to cut them off, just to change the terms of engagement." "I know," I said, appreciating her wisdom. "I'll call them this weekend, once the initial reaction has settled." She nodded, retrieving her tablet. "In the meantime, we have a board presentation Monday. Perhaps focusing on that would be a welcome distraction." It was exactly the redirection I needed, a reminder that regardless of family drama, I had responsibilities and achievements that existed independently of their approval or understanding. The rest of the day passed in a strange parallel reality. In my professional world, I led meetings, made decisions, and guided my team with confident authority. In my personal world, my phone accumulated increasingly urgent messages from family members, each one demanding immediate attention to the crisis I had supposedly created. By evening, I had 3 voicemails from my mother, 2 texts from my father, and another social media post from Madison, this one subtler but still clearly directed at me. Reminder that there are always 2 sides to every story. Truth isn't determined by who has the bigger platform. Just saying. I silenced my phone and drove home through the darkness, streetlights reflecting off the snow in ethereal patterns. Inside my condo, I poured a glass of wine and settled onto the couch, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of the day's emotions. Anxiety, irritation, but also a surprising sense of peace. The truth was out there now, my perspective given voice after years of silence. My laptop sat on the coffee table, and I opened it to check the publication site again. The comments section had grown substantially since morning, filled with responses that made my breath catch. "Thank you for putting words to experiences I've had my entire career." I read this in tears, seeing my own family dynamics reflected so clearly. As a woman in tech who's constantly battling family expectations, this feels like permission to stop apologizing for my success. I'm sending this to every professional woman I know who's been made to feel that her ambition is somehow a character flaw. These voices, strangers connecting with my most personal revelations, created a strange community of understanding that transcended the boundaries of my immediate circle. Their responses confirmed what Diana and Nathan had suggested, that my private struggle was actually part of a broader pattern, one that needed acknowledgement and discussion. As I scrolled through the comments, a new email notification appeared, from James, sent to my personal rather than work address. The subject line read simply, "I read your article." I hesitated before opening it, unsure what to expect. Anger, on Madison's behalf? Professional concern about potential fallout? A personal response from someone caught in the middle? "Erika," the message began, "I want you to know that I read your piece today. While Madison is understandably upset at seeing family matters discussed publicly, I found it thoughtful and important. It helped me understand dynamics I've observed but couldn't fully contextualize. Thank you for your courage in sharing this perspective. I hope you know that my professional respect for you remains unchanged. In fact, it has only deepened. This email is personal and private. I won't be discussing it at work. Regards, James." The message surprised me, its thoughtfulness, its clear respect for both professional boundaries and personal truths. James continued to defy the expectations I'd had of Madison's husband, showing an independence of thought and emotional intelligence I hadn't initially given him credit for. I closed the laptop without responding. Some communications didn't need an immediate reply. Some simply needed to be received and acknowledged internally. James's message fell into that category, a quiet bridge of understanding I hadn't expected, but deeply appreciated. Saturday morning brought a fresh dusting of snow and a text from Nathan. "Your piece is making the rounds at Sarah's office. 3 women have already asked if she knows you. You've struck a nerve in the best possible way. Coffee later to celebrate your literary debut?" I smiled at his characteristically supportive response. Yes to coffee, though celebration might be premature given the family fallout. "All the more reason to celebrate," came his swift reply. 2 p.m. at Stellara? "See you there," I confirmed, feeling grateful for the simple constancy of friendship amid the emotional turbulence of the past few days. Before I could set my phone down, it rang, my mother's name appearing on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, knowing the conversation couldn't be postponed indefinitely. "Hello, Mom." "Erika?" Her voice was tight, controlled. "I hardly know what to say. To read such things about your family, about how we supposedly treated you, it's devastating." I moved to the window, watching the snow fall as I formulated my response. "The piece wasn't meant to hurt you, Mom. It was about sharing experiences that many professional women have faced with their families. By portraying us as unsupportive monsters?" The hurt in her voice was genuine, which made it all the more difficult to navigate. "Making it sound like we held you back? That we didn't love you for who you are?" "That wasn't my intention," I said carefully. "But those were my experiences, my feelings. They're valid, even if they don't match your perception of our family dynamic. Your father can't even bring himself to discuss it," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "And Madison, she's absolutely devastated. Her colleagues are asking if she's the sister in the article. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for her?" The irony of her concern for Madison's humiliation when she'd shown none for mine at the wedding wasn't lost on me, but pointing that out would only escalate tensions further. "I'm sorry you're hurt," I said instead. "That truly wasn't my goal. But I'm not going to apologize for sharing my perspective, especially when it's resonating with so many other women who've had similar experiences." She was quiet for a moment, then asked in a smaller voice, "Is that really how you see us? As people who tried to limit you, who couldn't celebrate your success?" The vulnerability in the question caught me off guard. For perhaps the first time, my mother seemed to be genuinely asking rather than defending or accusing. "Not in a malicious way," I said carefully. "I've never thought you or Dad intentionally tried to hold me back, but yes, there's been a pattern of subtly dismissing my choices, of comparing me unfavorably to Madison, of treating my ambition as somehow inappropriate or excessive." "We were worried," she said after a pause. "The path you chose, it seemed so lonely, so demanding. We didn't want you to sacrifice happiness for success. But that's just it, Mom. My work, my independence, my ambition, these things are part of my happiness, not obstacles to it. When you treat them as problems to be solved or phases to outgrow, you're not seeing me for who I actually am." The silence that followed felt different from our usual impasses, less defensive, more contemplative. Finally, she spoke again. "I can't say I fully understand your perspective. It's difficult to see ourselves through someone else's eyes, especially when that view is so different from our intentions. But I am trying to listen, really listen." It wasn't an apology or a complete acknowledgement, but it was something new. A tentative step toward genuine communication rather than the rehearsed roles we'd played for decades. "That's all I'm asking for," I said softly. "To be heard. To have my experiences validated even if they don't match what you intended or how Madison experienced the same family dynamics." "Will you still be joining us for Christmas?" she asked, the question revealing her ongoing struggle to balance old expectations with new understandings. I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. Right now, I think we all need some space to process. Let's talk again in a few weeks, okay? She agreed, reluctance evident in her voice but no longer insisting on immediate resolution. After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking out at the snow, processing the subtle shifts in our interaction. No dramatic breakthrough, no tearful reconciliation, just small cracks in the foundations of established patterns, thin fissures where new growth might eventually take root. By the time I met Nathan at Stellara Coffee that afternoon, I felt more settled. The conversation with my mother having provided, if not resolution, then at least a clearer perspective on the path forward. "So," Nathan said as we settled into a corner table with our drinks, "how bad is the family meltdown?" I gave him a wry smile. "On a scale of 1 to nuclear, somewhere around a moderate earthquake. Significant damage, but structures still standing." He nodded, stirring his latte thoughtfully. "Not surprising. You basically broke the cardinal rule of dysfunctional families. Thou shalt not speak the truth aloud." "That's exactly it," I agreed. The content itself almost matters less than the fact that I said it publicly, that I refuse to maintain the silence we've all agreed to for decades. "And yet," Nathan pointed out, "the world hasn't ended. Your career is thriving, the article is resonating with readers, and eventually your family will either adapt or not." He shrugged. "Either way, you'll be okay." The simple confidence in his statement was oddly comforting. He was right. Whatever happened with my family, I had built a life that existed independently of their approval or understanding. I had a career I loved, friends who saw and valued me for who I actually was, and now a voice in conversations that mattered to me. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about," I said, changing the subject. "Remember that writing retreat you mentioned a few months ago? The one in Santa Fe for women in corporate leadership?" Nathan's eyebrows rose slightly. "The one you dismissed as not your thing because it involved sharing feelings with strangers? That retreat?" I laughed at his accurate recollection of my dismissal. "Yes, that one. Is it too late to register? For the January session?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Look at you, embracing personal growth and community. Who are you, and what have you done with my emotionally guarded friend Erika?" "Very funny," I said, but couldn't help smiling in return. Publishing the article made me realize how isolating it's been to keep these experiences private, to assume they were unique to me. Maybe it's time to connect with others who understand, to learn from their journeys as well. I think that's called emotional intelligence, and I'm very proud of you for developing it," he teased, then grew more serious. "It's not too late. I know the organizer. I can send her an email tonight if you want." "Please do," I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt about this step outside my usual comfort zone. I think it's time for something new. As we continued talking, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. "Madison. We need to talk, in person. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Riverside Park by the East Bench. Just you and me." I showed the message to Nathan, who whistled low. "The summit meeting. Are you going to go?" I considered the question carefully. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect myself from what would likely be an emotionally charged confrontation. But another part recognized that real change required difficult conversations, that bridges couldn't be built without both parties showing up to the construction site. Yes, I decided. Whatever happens next with my family, it needs to start with honesty, not avoidance. Nathan squeezed my hand briefly. "Want me to be on standby? I make an excellent extraction team if needed." I laughed, grateful for his unwavering support. "I'll text you when it's over. If you don't hear from me by noon, send in the cavalry." That night, as snow continued to fall outside my window, I prepared for the meeting with Madison, not by rehearsing arguments or defenses, but by clarifying what I actually wanted from our relationship moving forward. Not the false harmony of my conforming to her expectations, not the competitive dynamic established in childhood, but something new. A relationship between adult sisters who might never be best friends, but could perhaps find a way to genuinely see and respect each other. It was, I realized, the same thing I wanted from my work, my friendships, my life as a whole. Not perfection, not constant affirmation, but authenticity. The freedom to be fully myself without apology or explanation. The space to evolve beyond old patterns and limiting beliefs. As I finally drifted toward sleep, Diana's words echoed in my mind. Establishing boundaries isn't the same as building walls. Tomorrow would test that distinction, revealing whether new boundaries could create the foundation for healthier connection or simply mark the territory of permanent estrangement. Either way, I was ready to face whatever came next, not as the family shame, but as exactly who I was meant to be. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the fresh snow glistening under a cloudless Colorado sky. I arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early, choosing the designated bench and brushing away a dusting of snow before sitting down. The park was quiet, just a few dedicated joggers and dog walkers creating trails of footprints across the pristine white landscape. At precisely 10 a.m., Madison appeared, walking purposefully along the cleared path. She was bundled in a cream-colored coat, her blonde hair tucked under a cashmere beanie, looking as polished as always despite the early hour and emotional circumstances. I straightened as she approached, bracing myself for whatever storm was about to break. She sat beside me without greeting, maintaining a careful distance on the bench. For several moments, we simply watched our breath form clouds in the cold air, neither willing to open the conversation. Finally, Madison spoke, her voice quieter than I expected. "James says I should try to understand your perspective." Not the accusatory opening I had anticipated. I turned slightly to study her profile, noting the faint shadows under her eyes, expertly concealed but visible to someone who had known her all her life. "Are you here because James suggested it, or because you want to be?" I asked. She sighed, a small sound that crystallized in the cold air. "Both. Neither." She paused. "I'm here because reading your article felt like looking at a fun house mirror version of our childhood. Recognizable, but distorted beyond reality." "It wasn't distorted, Madison," I said gently. "It was simply seen through different eyes. My eyes." She turned to face me fully, her expression a complex mixture of hurt and defensiveness. "You made it sound like I was the villain in your story, like Mom and Dad played favorites and I benefited while you suffered." "That wasn't my intention," I said carefully. "But from my perspective, that's how it felt. You were celebrated for following the path they valued. I was questioned for choosing differently. So you published it for everyone to see? Do you have any idea what that's done to Mom? To Dad? To me?" Her voice rose slightly, emotion bleeding through her composed exterior. I took a deep breath, resisting the pull of old patterns, the instinct to apologize, to take responsibility for everyone else's feelings. "I published it because it's a story that resonates with many women. Because keeping it private wasn't helping anyone, least of all me. And yes, I understood there would be consequences, but I decided my voice mattered, enough to accept them." Madison was quiet for a long moment, absently tracing patterns in the snow with her booted foot. "You've always been like this, you know, so convinced of your rightness that you never stop to consider how your actions affect others." The accusation stung, but I recognized the defensive deflection for what it was. "Madison, I spent most of my life considering how my choices affected all of you. Worrying that I was disappointing you, trying to balance being true to myself with meeting family expectations. It was exhausting and ultimately impossible. And I suppose calling me out at your workplace was part of this new authentic you?" She countered, referring to our confrontation in my office. That was about setting boundaries, not attacking you, I clarified. There's a difference between aggression and self-protection. She scoffed slightly, but there was less heat in it than I expected. James said something similar, that boundaries aren't weapons, they're just necessary sometimes. The mention of James again caught my attention. Clearly, he had been more than a passive observer in Madison's processing of these events. I wondered what conversations had been happening in their home, what perspective he had offered from his unique position between us. He seems like a good man, I offered cautiously. Someone who thinks for himself. A small, genuine smile briefly softened her features. He is, sometimes annoyingly so. She hesitated, then continued with visible effort. He said he admires you, your leadership, your integrity. That hurt, if I'm being honest. The admission surprised me with its vulnerability. Why? Because, she said slowly, you were always the difficult one, the complicated one. I was the good daughter. That was our narrative, the roles we played. And now my husband admires my difficult sister more than the family he married into. She met my gaze directly. Do you know how that feels? For the first time, I glimpsed something I'd never fully considered. How Madison's identity had been as shaped by our family dynamic as mine had been. If I was cast as the rebel, the disappointment, she had been cast as the perfect daughter, the standard bearer of family values. Perhaps that role had its own constraints, its own invisible chains. I think, I said carefully, that we've both been limited by the narratives we grew up with. You as much as me, just in different ways. Something in my response reached her. The defensiveness in her posture softened slightly. Maybe, she conceded, but publishing that article, it felt like you were rewriting history without consulting any of the other characters. I wasn't trying to rewrite history, I explained. Just to finally tell my version of it. The version that's been silenced or dismissed for most of my life. Madison picked up a handful of snow, letting it sift through her gloved fingers. And now what? We're supposed to just move forward as if everything's fine? As if you haven't changed how people see our family forever? No, I said honestly. I don't expect everything to be fine. I expect it to be different. I'm no longer willing to pretend that the dynamic we've had all these years is healthy or sustainable. That doesn't mean I don't want a relationship with you, with Mom and Dad. It just means I want one based on who I actually am, not who you wish I was. She was quiet for a long time, watching a cardinal land on a snow-covered branch nearby, a vivid splash of red against the white. I don't know if I can give you that, she finally said. I don't know if any of us can. The honesty in her response was oddly comforting. No false promises, no easy resolution. I understand, I said, but I hope you'll try. That's all I'm asking for. Just try to see me, really see me, instead of the idea of me you've held on to all these years. Madison stood, brushing snow from her coat. I should go. James is waiting for me at the cafe down the street. She paused, hesitating before adding, for what it's worth, I never thought of you as the family shame. Not really. I was hurt and angry at the wedding, and the champagne. It was a cruel thing to say. I knew it as soon as it left my mouth. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest Madison had ever come to acknowledging her role in our fractured relationship. I nodded, accepting the partial olive branch for what it was. Thank you for saying that, and for meeting me today. She nodded once, then turned to leave, her footsteps crunching in the fresh snow. She had gone about 10 paces when she stopped and turned back. Are you coming for Christmas? She asked, the question hanging in the cold air between us. Considered my answer carefully. I haven't decided yet. I need to think about what's healthiest for everyone. Well, she said, if you do come, I promise not to call you names in front of your employees. A small smile tugged at the corner, of her mouth. Not warm exactly, but not hostile either. Appreciated, I replied with a matching smile. And I promise not to publish any more family revelations without advance warning. She rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of humor in the gesture, rather than pure irritation. With a final nod, she turned and continued down the path, her figure gradually diminishing against the snowy landscape. I remained on the bench for a long time after she left, watching the winter sun climb higher in the sky, feeling neither triumph nor defeat, but something more nuanced, the quiet understanding that real change happened not in dramatic confrontations, but in these small moments of honesty, these tiny shifts in perspective. That evening, I received an unexpected email from the publication that had featured my article. Due to unprecedented response, we'd like to discuss the possibility of expanding your piece into a regular column focused on women's professional journeys and the personal challenges that shape them. Would you be interested in exploring this opportunity? I stared at the screen, a strange sense of possibility unfurling within me. Writing had been an outlet, a way to process my experiences and connect with others who might understand. I hadn't considered it might become something more, a platform, a purpose beyond my technical career. As I contemplated this unexpected turn, my phone lit up with a text from Nathan. How did it go with Madison? Need emergency ice cream therapy? I smiled, typing back, better than expected. Actually considering Christmas with the family. Progress, not perfection. His response came quickly. Proud of you. Standing your ground and keeping the door open. That's growth, my friend. Growth. The word resonated deeply. I had spent so many years focused on professional advancement that I had neglected this other type of development. The emotional intelligence that Diana had mentioned. The capacity to maintain boundaries without building walls. The next morning, I sent 2 emails before even beginning my workday. The first to the publication, accepting their offer to discuss a potential column. The second to my parents, confirming that I would join them for Christmas Day, though I would be staying at a hotel rather than in my childhood bedroom. Small steps toward a new kind of relationship, one where I could be fully present without being fully consumed. As I drove to work, the winter sun illuminating the snow-covered mountains in the distance, I felt a sense of peace that had little to do with external circumstances and everything to do with internal alignment. My family might never fully understand my choices or celebrate my path the way I had once hoped. My professional achievements might continue to perplex them. My independence challenged their expectations. But I no longer needed their understanding to validate my journey. The family shame, Madison's cruel label, had been transformed. Not erased, but reinterpreted. What had once been a source of pain had become a catalyst for growth, for connection, with others walking similar paths, for a voice I might never have found without that moment of public humiliation. James nodded respectfully as our paths crossed in the office hallway, our shared secret understanding passing silently between us. Later that week, I would officially announce his promotion to technical director, recognition well earned through his contributions to the AI division. Our complex family connection would remain exactly that, complex. But our professional relationship would continue to be governed by mutual respect and shared goals. Life rarely offers neat resolutions or perfect endings. Relationships evolve. Boundaries shift. Understanding deepens gradually rather than suddenly. But standing in my truth had created something precious, the freedom to be exactly who I was, without apology or explanation. The family shame had become the author of her own story, the architect of her own boundaries, the woman who had finally learned that respect begins with respecting herself. And in that knowledge, I found not just success, but something far more valuable: peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.